Hi, everyone. My name is John Faulkner. I am your host of the Smarter Systems Better Care podcast. I'm here today with Sean Pitroda. He is the Associate Professor of Radiation and Cellular Oncology at the University of Chicago Medical Center, and he serves as co-founder and Chief Medical Officer at Persona DX. Thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here today, John. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, and just to kick us off, tell us a bit about your background.
Absolutely. So, as you pointed to, my background is I'm a radiation oncologist at University of Chicago, and I did my MD training there as well. And what really part of my background that really led to Persona DX was during my training, I spent a lot of time interacting with cancer patients, and the ones that really, you, really affected me quite a lot were those patients with stage 4 or metastatic cancer, because I saw, all the suffering that those patients were going through. During the time through a medical training, I was excited about medical research, and these 2 points, stage 4 cancer and my interest in medical research really came together. And I had the pleasure of really interacting with a lot of great mentors and individuals during my training who got me excited about pursuing research in this area. And ultimately, that led me to pursuing my training as an oncologist and ultimately a radiation oncologist. And I specialize in treating patients with stage 4 cancer. And through research and clinical trials, and we've made a lot of progress. I mean, I would love to share more about that with you today.
Where do you spend the most energy kind of driving the growth day to day?
Most of my time at Persona DX, because it is a startup, has been in the development of various tests in our pipeline. So we're really excited to pursue a number of different opportunities. And so Persona DX, to give you a little background, we're a precision oncology company, and our focus is to develop AI-powered diagnostic tests. And specifically, these tests are meant to identify patients who have stage 4 metastatic cancer that is potentially curable with localized treatments like surgery and radiation. And we co-founded Persona DX along with Kevin Donnelly, our CEO, and Ralph Weichselbaum, our Chief Scientific Officer, who happens to also be a colleague at University of Chicago. And Ralph was one of the first who developed this idea that certain patients with stage 4 cancer that he called oligometastasis could be cured with local therapies. And this was really quite revolutionary for cancer treatment. And Persona DX really addresses this critical gap in precision medicine, which is that we don't quite know how to define these patients very well. And so what we're doing at Persona DX is creating biomarkers that go beyond just drug selection, but really overall treatment selection. And our first test is using genomic data from patient with colon cancer that has metastasized to the liver. And by applying our proprietary AI algorithms, we can tell you not only if the tumor is going to recur, but crucially where it's going to recur and how it's going to recur. And we believe very strongly that this will enable oncologists to identify the right treatment for each patient. This is quite a bit different than the traditional testing in oncology that mostly has focused on drug responses for patients with stage 4 cancer, mostly for palliative therapy. But we're really coming at it as what we think is a paradigm shift, because our goal is to try to offer curative approaches for patients with stage 4 cancer. And we believe that this is going to be possible through these biomarkers that we're developing at Persona DX.
What stage are you at now in Persona DX, or like what stage of funding are?
Yeah. So we've raised essentially pre-seed funding to invest to venture capitalists from Silicon Valley, who are really excited about the capabilities that we bring, not only in terms of data and AI, but also the applications of these technologies to the healthcare space. And so currently we've raised pre-seed funding, but we're actually ready to launch our first test. And so despite not having to raise large amounts of funds to date, we've been able to actually get quite far and get a test to market.
That's amazing. What kind of feedback have you been getting from people that you've kind of shown what you can do for patients? I'm assuming because Chicago is a research-based medical center that other research organizations would have a high interest in this area as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings up an important point that one major shift that we're trying to pursue in the industry is that we're most oncology tests are really missing a key opportunity, and that's the failure to develop biomarkers that could guide potentially curative approaches. Our field of precision oncology has really been laser focused on matching patients to certain drugs, and that's important. But what we've neglected are approaches that have shown potential curative interventions like surgery and radiation. And when you consider the fact that treatments like surgery and radiation cure many patients with stage 1 through 3 cancer, and there's quite a bit of emerging evidence now that in certain patients with stage 4 cancer, we can also cure them or extend survival significantly. It's really striking that we don't have great ways to identify these patients. And so, what we hear over and over from oncologists is that having such a test is really going to be a game changer, not only to have patients potentially improve their outcome, but really creating this paradigm shift in the way that we can help oncologists see the appropriate treatment options for given patients. And so, we're really excited to implement the first test of its kind to be able to execute such an approach. The approach commonly taken for stage 4 cancer is start with a drug, and once it stops working, move to the next drug, and essentially keep moving it down the path until we have no other options. And unfortunately, patients aren't cured with those approaches. And so we really need better ways to design treatment protocols for patients. And what's lacking from most protocols is how do we integrate in these localized approaches, which have proven successful in many clinical studies. And so we feel strongly that, like you said, this could really be a paradigm shift for how we treat patients with stage 4 disease.
And kind of zooming out a little bit as well, looking at the industry as a whole, do you see any other movements in the industry similar to this, or any other unique approaches that the audience may want to hear more about out there today?
Yeah, in the industry, specifically in precision oncology applied to patients with stage 4 cancer, much of it has a focus on development of biomarkers to predict specific drug responses. And there are many new drugs that are being developed and currently in the pipeline. Occasionally, some of the drugs will be blockbusters and improve outcomes significantly for certain subsets of patients. But by and large, these drugs, while they are very helpful and have really dramatically changed outcomes for patients, haven't been able to cure patients of metastatic disease. And so more needs to be done. And we feel strongly that our approach could be integrated into existing, clinical testing infrastructures, as well as treatment paradigms, building upon what's been done to date in terms of medical therapy, but integrating in other interventions that could potentially augment those drug responses, like approaches such as surgery and radiotherapy.
And when you're working on this day to day, for Persona DX, trying to move forward in this process to bring it to market, where is it moving slower than you'd like to see?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the biggest challenge that we faced so far is that our business model has been quite unique. So, for example, most diagnostic tests that are run through a specific lab are often run through a single laboratory. And we're using a very different model. It's sort of a more distributed approach whereby our partner Caris Life Sciences generates the RNA sequencing data that we utilize. We take that RNA sequencing data and apply our proprietary AI algorithms. And then our CLIA lab partner, Protein Biodiagnostics, reports the clinical results to the patients and the oncologists. And so this sort of partnership, this multi-partner model, we believe will allow us to leverage sort of the best in-class capabilities at each step. But coordinating across the various companies has elements that require really careful orchestration. And so the challenge has really been working through the logistics of the data transfer, the quality control, checkpoints, and ensuring that there's a seamless communication between partners. And it's a bit more complex in terms of an operational model, but we believe strongly that it allows us to focus on what we do best. And for Persona DX, that's the AI and the clinical interpretation. And this allows us to use existing partnerships with established leaders that have expertise in sequencing and clinical reporting. And so this has been a bit of a challenge and has made it slightly slower in terms of execution, but we feel strongly that this is the right approach to take given how innovative and potentially paradigm shifting our biomarker could be.
And when you're working as well, what's working really well right now that you would never want to lose throughout this process?
Yeah, that's a great question. We believe what's working very well is our development of additional tests. And so our current test that's ready to be deployed very soon is in colorectal cancer that is metastasized to the liver. But we have additional tests in our pipeline across other cancer types beyond colorectal cancer. And they use a very similar approach. And so the framework that we've developed with colorectal cancer can be applied to other diseases where we're integrating clinical and molecular data with AI to inform treatment selection beyond just drug therapy. And we feel very strongly that the science behind our tests is very robust and that establishing this clinical utility is very clear. And definitely speaking to oncologists and physicians that are potentially likely to use our test, we feel that there's a strong clinical need here. And what's been harder than expected is just that we're not just introducing a new test, but it's really introducing a new and fundamentally different way of thinking about stage 4 cancer. And so we're really asking oncologists to consider potential cure as a realistic goal for patients who are selected based on the biomarkers that we're developing. And to us, that's really a bigger paradigm shift than just adopting a new biomarker in the precision oncology space.
Yeah, it sounds like you put a lot of development around the biomarkers as well throughout this process. Are there, I know this is probably a more scientific question, are there very specific biomarkers that kind of come to mind as an example that you could discuss, or I'm just curious to hear more about that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So one of our tests in colorectal cancer really provided some quite striking results. So when we developed this test, we looked at patients who looked relatively uniform in terms of patient and tumor criteria, in terms of age and gender and the presentation of their cancer. And so this is a relatively um, homogeneous group in terms of how patients with colorectal cancer commonly present, but there are obviously heterogeneous aspects clinically as well. But what was quite striking is that the outcomes of these patients was quite dramatically different. Some patients did very well and were cured, about a quarter of the subset of patients that we studied, but half of patients had more adverse outcomes. Their cancer tended to develop widespread disease, even though it initially presented with limited stage 4 cancer. And so what we did is we used molecular sequencing approaches to analyze those liver metastases. And what we found is that indeed those differences in the outcomes of the patient that we studied could be predicted very accurately with the different biological features that we found in the liver metastases. And so specifically, a subset of patients who had more immune infiltration and an immune activated phenotype within the tumor tended to have the best prognosis. Whereas other patients who had more of an inflammatory or stromal reaction within the tumor or had defective DNA repair or increased proliferative capacity tended to have worse outcomes. And so biologically, there was a unique underpinning for the differences in prognosis that we saw across these patients. And these were actually validated in a randomized trial that later was analyzed based on our initial discovery. And even more when you take the biological features and you add those to certain everyday clinical factors that have been described previously, what we found is that we can even more robustly stratify patients into a low, intermediate, and high risk group, with the low risk group having an excellent survival, about
Hmm.
90% at 10 years, but the high risk group having much worse outcome, roughly about 20 to 30% survival at 10 years. So the difference in prognosis was quite dramatic across the high, intermediate, and low risk populations. And this is exactly the foundation that served for the tests that we've developed and are ready to deploy into the clinic.
Is your focus more on the high risk group right now, or between all three of them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we believe that by having this information about the integrated risk groups, the high, intermediate, and low risk, that can not only guide the initial selection of treatment for patients, but also subsequent selection of treatment. For example, if a patient comes to clinic and maybe unfortunately, due to other medical comorbidities, they aren't the best candidate for a major operation. And you find that their biology indicates that their tumor is likely to be a higher risk. That might shift your decision making away from a major operation that has potential morbidity and mortality more towards systemic treatments, chemotherapies, and other approaches that may be better tolerated and better suited for the patient's biological features. But on the other end of the spectrum, you may have a patient who has a lower risk cancer, and maybe they already had an operation on their liver some time ago and now the cancer's come back in the liver. And typically oncologists are unsure whether to go back in, do another operation, or do I just treat the patient with chemotherapy? However, our test indicates that a low risk patient can actually recur half of the time, and all the recurrences tend to be in the liver. So going back in and doing another operation might be best suited for a patient with a lower risk of their cancer. And so the test really can help guide not only initial management decisions, but also subsequent decisions, both from the perspective of when is surgery or when are other local interventions needed versus systemic interventions like chemotherapies or other targeted approaches.
And when you're looking at Persona DX, where do you want it to be in 6 months?
The success of our company really has a few different components. I think first and foremost, building our team is critical. And so we're in the process of really building the team with individuals who not only understand the science, but our vision of curing patients with metastatic disease. Beyond that, secondly, generating additional, high quality, highly curated data sets where we can prove the clinical utility of our approach across other diseases beyond colon cancer is very critical. And we're excited that we're already developing several additional tests in other diseases that we hope will hit the market sometime next year. And lastly, demonstrating that there's real value to the test. And the value should be not only to the patients, but the oncologist and even the healthcare system, and showing that a precision approach to curative treatments can improve outcomes and improve our ability to utilize resources optimally. And so success really means proving this original idea that stage 4 cancer can be curable. This idea that we really pioneered decades ago, but have operationalized through these robust precision biomarkers is really what's going to determine success. I think really turning what started, as a revolutionary clinical observation into a systematic and a reproducible approach to curing selected patients with stage 4 cancer is our ultimate goal.
Well, thank you for being on the podcast today. Where can people find you if they want to learn more and connect with you?
So they can turn to our Persona DX website, and we'd be happy to share additional information about our company and the various studies that we published using our approach. And we'd love to connect with you if you have any questions or are excited about our technology. So I really appreciate the opportunity to tell you about Persona DX, and we're excited to see where things take us in the future.
Well, thank you for your time today. It was a wonderful discussion, and it's truly innovative what you're coming up with. So thank you for your time.
Appreciate the opportunity.